There was a time when the sound of a train whistle carried across the valleys and towns of America like a heartbeat. It was sharp, haunting, and full of promise, the kind of sound you could hear even from miles away, echoing through the night. If you close your eyes, you might still see it. A steam locomotive rolling into the station, a plume of white smoke rising into the sky. The platform crowded with people, men in work jackets holding lunch pails, women in simple dresses carrying baskets, soldiers saying goodbye or returning home. Children pressed their faces against the railing, wide-eyed as they counted the cars clattering past. In those mid-century decades, the train was not just a machine, it was a bridge that tied together the farthest corners of America. From the steel cities in the east to the farms of the Midwest and all the way out to the Golden Coast of California, the railroad carried people, stories, and dreams. The whistle marked the rhythm of life. For many, it meant the start of a journey. For others, it was simply the sound of home, reminding them that even if the world felt vast, it was still connected by iron rails. The story of America cannot be told without the railroad. Long before the highways and the airports, it was the rails that stitched the country together. Back in 1869, when the Golden Spike was driven at Promontory, Utah, the first transcontinental railroad was complete. For the first time, a person could travel from coast to coast without months of hardship on wagon trails. The railroad transformed a vast, scattered land into a connected nation. By the middle of the 20th century, those rails had spread like veins across the map. Names like Pennsylvania Railroad, Union Pacific, Santa Fe, they weren't just companies, they were lifelines, carrying millions of tons of steel, coal, grain, and timber, and with them, the hopes of a growing nation. Every major city pulsed with the rhythm of the railroad. New York, Chicago, St. Louis, Los Angeles, each had grand stations, cathedrals of stone and iron where travelers passed through on their way to new beginnings. Grand Central Terminal in New York stood as both a symbol of progress and a meeting place where generations said their farewells and reunions. And it wasn't only goods or soldiers or businessmen the trains carried. They carried the everyday lives of ordinary Americans. Farmers sending their harvest, young couples heading west for opportunity, immigrants arriving on the East Coast and boarding trains that would take them to brand new homes in the heartland. In those days, the railroad wasn't background noise. It was the center of life. It gave America its speed, its reach, and its unity. Without it, the nation would have felt smaller, slower, and far more divided. Behind every whistle and every mile of track were the men and women who kept the railroads alive. They weren't just workers, they were the heartbeat of the system. Engineers sat at the controls of massive locomotives, guiding thousands of tons of steel across mountains, plains, and rivers. Firemen shoveled coal into roaring furnaces, their faces streaked with soot, sweat dripping down as the engines thundered forward. Conductors walked the aisles, checking tickets and keeping order, while brakemen climbed across the tops of moving cars to slow the train on steep grades. Track crews worked long, grueling hours, repairing rails under the hot sun or in the biting cold. A broken spike, a warped rail, or a washed-out bridge could all mean disaster, and so their labor was constant, tireless, and often unseen. Shifts were long, 12, sometimes 14 hours. Many workers slept in bunk cars by the tracks, ready to rise before dawn and start again. Accidents were a constant fear. Derailments, explosions, fires, yet there was pride in the work. Ask any old railroader and they'll tell you, we kept America moving. For African American porters, especially those who worked the luxury Pullman cars, life was both opportunity and hardship. They carried bags, shined shoes, served meals, and stayed awake through the night for passengers' comfort. The pay was meager, the hours endless, but the job was steady, and it gave dignity and community to generations of black families. The railroad wasn't just iron and steam, it was sweat, muscle, and calloused hands. Without the workers, the trains would never have run, and the nation's great progress would have slowed to a crawl. Life along the rails was more than steel and schedules. It shaped the rhythm of entire towns. In small communities, the train station was the center of activity. A diner across from the depot served hot coffee and slices of pie to passengers waiting for their connections. Newsstands sold fresh papers and candy bars, the latest magazines and postcards that travelers mailed back home. Families gathered on the platform just to watch the trains roll through, waving at strangers leaning from the windows. For working men, the end of a long shift often meant stepping into a corner tavern near the tracks. A cheap beer, a smoke, and the sound of a jukebox spinning country tunes or the new rock and roll hits gave them relief after hours of back-breaking labor. Jazz drifted out of city bars in places like Chicago and New Orleans at night, mixing with the distant rumble of freight trains. Sundays were different. The same workers who loaded freight all week would dress in their best and gather at the local church. The railroads made it possible for families to come together, even when loved ones lived a few towns apart. A short ride on the local line turned a distant visit into an easy trip. And then there was the magic of the drive-in movie theater. Teenagers pulling up in cars, radios tuned in, while freight trains thundered by in the distance. The glow of the movie screen, the laughter of young couples, and the whistle of a night train combined into a soundtrack of mid-century America. Sports, too, felt the pulse of the railroad. Baseball teams and football squads crisscrossed the country by train, entire seasons unfolding on the rails. Fans in Pittsburgh or St. Louis might see their heroes stepping down from a passenger car, greeted like royalty. The railroad wasn't just transportation. It was woven into daily life, into the culture and the music, into the way Americans gathered, worked, prayed, and dreamed. It gave communities a rhythm, a heartbeat they could count on, the sound of a train passing in the night. The golden years of American railroads were filled with milestones that captured the imagination of the nation. In 1955, the California Zephyr was already being called the most talked-about train in America. With its sleek silver cars and panoramic dome windows, passengers could gaze at the Rockies or the deserts of Nevada in comfort. Families saved up to afford the trip, making it as much an adventure as a vacation. By the late 1950s, streamliners became symbols of speed and style. Names like the Super Chief, the 20th Century Limited, and the City of New Orleans weren't just trains. They were part of American identity. Hollywood stars and politicians alike were photographed stepping off those cars, their luggage carried by uniformed porters. Riding the rails meant moving with grace. Railroads also played a quiet but vital role in America's Cold War years. Troop movements, military equipment, and critical supplies all depended on the reliability of the tracks. Every whistle and every crossing sign carried with it a sense of security, a reminder that America's backbone was built on steel rails. By the late 1950s and moving into the 1960s, the proud railroads of America began to face a slow decline. The world around them was changing at a speed no timetable could keep up with. The rise of the automobile transformed how Americans traveled. Families now dreamed of loading their cars and driving on the brand new interstate highway system, which President Eisenhower launched in 1956. It was freedom on four wheels. No conductor, no schedules, just the open road. Gas was cheap, motels lined the highways, and the adventure of driving felt more personal than a seat on a train. At the same time, commercial airlines were capturing the skies. What once took days by train could be crossed in hours by plane. The novelty of air travel, the modern airports, and the promise of speed made the rails seem old-fashioned to many travelers. Businessmen who once proudly rode the Super Chief were now boarding jets in pressed suits, briefcases in hand. Freight, too, began to shift. Trucks carried goods directly to warehouses and stores, bypassing rail yards. The convenience of road shipping chipped away at the railroad's dominance. For the companies that ran these great lines, the costs grew heavier. Aging locomotives, worn tracks, and shrinking passenger numbers drained profits. By the late 1960s, once glamorous trains were being discontinued. Dining cars were removed, services were cut, and timetables grew thinner. Cities that once roared with the sound of trains began to quiet. Grand stations that had welcomed millions fell into disrepair or were demolished. The echo of footsteps on marble floors replaced the bustling energy of travelers with suitcases and porters calling out destinations. For the American people, it was bittersweet. Railroads had been the arteries of the nation for more than a century. Now they seemed to be fading, giving way to the hum of engines on highways and the roar of jets overhead. Even as the golden age of railroads faded, the memory of that era stayed alive in the hearts of millions of Americans. For those who grew up in the 1940s and 1950s, the train was more than a machine. It was part of life itself. People remember the sound first, the low whistle cutting through the night, the steady rhythm of wheels turning against steel rails. Children would run to the tracks just to wave at the engineer, hoping for a blast of the horn. Couples remember falling asleep to the distant echo of trains, a lullaby carried across small towns. The stations, too, remain unforgettable. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, chandeliers, and murals that told the story of progress. Grand Central in New York, Union Station in Chicago, and dozens of smaller depots across the country still stand as symbols of when rail was king. Some became museums, others were restored, but each one holds layers of memory. Culturally, railroads shaped how America thought of itself. Songs were written about trains, from blues and folk ballads to early rock and roll. Movies showed sleek streamliners gliding across wide landscapes. The image of a conductor checking his watch or a porter carrying bags became part of the American imagination. For workers, there is pride in knowing they built more than schedules and routes. They carried soldiers to war, families to new homes, and goods that built cities. To this day, older Americans who worked on the rails speak of the brotherhood of their crews and the dignity of keeping the nation moving. Though highways and airplanes took center stage, the railroads never completely disappeared. Amtrak, founded in 1971, kept passenger service alive. Freight trains still snake across the country hauling steel, coal, and grain. And in a way, every horn heard today is an echo of the golden years. For many seniors now, looking back on those days is like opening a family album. The train is there in the background of memories. The first trip to the big city, the last ride home from college, the journeys to weddings, funerals, and reunions. The railroad was not just transportation, it was the thread that stitched America together. In the quiet moments of memory, the railroads still run. The golden age may have passed, but its spirit remains in the stories of those who lived it.
Every whistle that once echoed across valleys, every station that welcomed weary travelers, every mile of track that bound towns together, all of it left a mark far deeper than steel. For older Americans today, remembering the railroad years is like opening a window to a time when life moved at the pace of the train. Slower, yes, but steady, reliable. And in that rhythm, there was a comfort, a sense that the nation was moving forward together. The locomotives carried not only people and freight, but also dreams. They carried soldiers off to war and brought them home again. They carried workers to new jobs, families to new towns, and children to new adventures. They gave shape to the everyday life of countless Americans, and in doing so, became part of the nation's soul. And though highways and airplanes rose to dominate, the memory of the rails never vanished. It lingers in the songs still sung, in the stations still standing, and in the hearts of those who once stood by the tracks, waving at a passing train. So when we look back at the golden age of American railroads, we do not just remember machines. We remember a time, a feeling, and a way of life. And perhaps for a moment, as we recall the low call of the whistle in the night, we can almost believe the trains are still running, carrying the stories of yesterday into the quiet of today.